Thus we have today's world and the human emergency. Exactly as Socrates said, it's not the expression of a violent and destructive human nature. Instead, it's the inevitable result of engines of domination working their institutional violence against human nature in the world. And thus we come to my theory's conclusion. Our only hope for the future is to shut the engines down. Political power must be abolished. Impossible, you say? I think not. If human ingenuity was great enough to create the engine, why shouldn't human ingenuity just as well abolish it? But to make this possible, we must correctly understand the problem we're trying to solve. As the engineers say, understanding the problem is 90% of solving it. The problem is not human nature, not better or worse systems of power, good rulers versus bad rulers. The problem is political power itself, the domestication of communities. Debating about rival systems or rulers is like debating about better and worse ways to have slavery. There is no good way to build or run the engine. The intention to dominate and live at the community's expense must be condemned. The institutions needed to accomplish that intention must be abolished. Our problem is whether we can do it, and if so, how. Before I discuss that, what would it mean to abolish domination? Domination is a tool for making tools of human beings. Abolishing it would mean liberating people from the status of tools to the status of free men and women. Abolishing it would mean the end of armed central authority, the end of war, the end of privileged rulers living at the expense of humanity and the habitat. Abolishing domination would simply mean a world of cooperative, peaceful communities thriving in harmony with their habitats. There's a word for such a world, a word corrupted almost beyond repair. But I insist it's the right word, and one we should use with pride. Anarchism. Now, I don't think anarchism should be some utopian blueprint. I think it's an ideal, a standard of human relations that can guide us in creating a better world. The standard is simply that communities don't need subjugating institutions, and they're best organized by relations among equals, not between superiors and subordinates, rulers and subjects. Communities with the least subjugation are closest to the ideal. The Greek word anarchos means without rulers. Instead of a few people living at the expense of the rest, all living for the common good of all. If human nature is violent and destructive, then anarchism is a fantasy at best, violence and chaos at worst. But if human nature is ingenious and cooperative, then anarchism is the only way humanity can thrive, and the way we did thrive for 250,000 years. Until domination began, the human flock ran free. So freedom's just another name for anarchism. But how would anarchism work? Don't ask me. That's for the people of the world to decide. The idea that some people can tell others how to live is the opposite of anarchism. For 6,000 years, more and more of the world has lived under domination. Even under this burden, communities everywhere have adapted brilliantly and made as fit a way of life as possible for themselves. If their adaptive brilliance were freed from domination, people would create ways of living that work better than anything we've seen for ages. Anarchism simply means they should be free to create them. Now, back to the question of abolition. If it seems impossible, we must ask why. No one's ever tried to abolish domination, so history hasn't shown that's true. In fact, the feeling that domination is inevitable comes from domestication. Any animal trainer knows the animal must understand who's in charge, and there's no alternative. We've lived under human domestication for hundreds of generations, so naturally we're brought up knowing who's in charge, and there's no alternative. But that is precisely domestication, to accept our captivity and learn to live under the yoke. The first and most important step is to believe we can be free, and we have every right to throw off the yoke. The feeling that we're powerless is domination's greatest weapon against us. Since no one's ever tried to abolish domination, we don't know whether it can be done or how. But the men who created domination didn't know how to build the engine when they began either. In other words, abolition is an experimental question. We can only find out the answer by doing the experiment. And that means we have to begin a long process of trial and error, trying our best, learning from our mistakes, and trying again. But not a random process. We must first restrain domination by popular force to reduce the human emergency's worst threats: nuclear war and destruction of the habitat. If we impose these restraints with the ultimate goal of abolition in mind, we'll learn a lot about our experimental question.